Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, believed that the Bible was the story of humankind's generation, degeneration, and regeneration. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. In the beginning, God created. God created the light, the land, the waters, the birds of the air, the creatures, and humankind. And God pronounced it good. God was well pleased. So that creation story, along with the other creation stories in the Bible, they're really a formula metaphysically for manifestation. When we get a divine idea, when we get an idea and we stand firmly in faith and we use our power of imagination to shape substance, we manifest. And what we manifest is good, because good is where we started. Good is where we began. Now, I don't know if you've ever actually read the Bible. You might have in a different religious tradition, or you might have in a Unity class. But the Hebrew Scriptures are full of stories about degeneration, and those stories are actually quite gruesome. They were true then, and the stories of degeneration are also true today. All we have to do is look at the news to see stories of degeneration in our time. Degeneration with domestic violence stories. It's stories about mass shootings. It's about drug and alcohol addictions. It's about political corruption. It's about racial tension. We generated and then we degenerated. We forgot our oneness with God. We forgot what it's like to be kind and respectful of each other. And we have forgotten in our degeneration about our own self-worth. But there is good news, because the rest of the Scriptures are about regeneration, about remembering our original divinity, about remembering the good news that divinity is inside us all the time. Regeneration is about remembering and recognizing our own self-worth. It's about remembering and recognizing our oneness with God. It's about remembering and recognizing how important it is to value the people that we are in community with and treat them with kindness and respect. This whole Christmas story is about the good news, and this holiday season, Reverend Nikki and I are committed to share the good news with you in the context of the Code of the Elves. The Code of the Elves. And now you may be laughing, because this is a 2003 classic Christmas movie studying Will Ferrell, who was Buddy, who was found as a baby. He had crawled into Santa's sack one Christmas Eve night and then taken back to the North Pole, where he was raised by elves. How holy could that be? But it is holy, because there are a lot of important lessons in this movie, some very spiritual ones, and some that are just good to know. For instance, you should never actually ever try to hug a raccoon. But the Code of the Elves does actually carry a very spiritual message that encapsulates the good news about regeneration, about living uninhibitedly, living in that faith, living in that peace, living in that love, and living in that joy that we were created to live in. I have a 24-second clip from the movie. Highly instructional, but you know how we do 3 things, 3 affirmations every Sunday. This is what the elves do. I'm sure they do. Can you try click it to the next slide? Here it is. Make every day like Christmas.
For everyone on the nice So.
That's how they recite them. And let me tell you, the first one is there's room for treat every day like Christmas. Reverend Nikki talked about it last week. She talked about how the spirit of Christmas is in us no matter what day of the calendar we're on. And that spirit of Christmas can come out in the most mundane things, like holding the door open for somebody who's coming in behind you. And it can be also found, that spirit of Christmas can be found every day in the way we choose to greet our friends. How special would it be if every day when we saw our friends, it was like, "Hi, how are you? I'm so happy to see you." We do practice that here at Unity of Wilmington. So that's treat every day like Christmas. And then the second one is there's room for everyone on the nice list. And we can go in several directions, theologically speaking, about being on the nice list. And the first one comes and is inspired from Luke 2, verses 10 and 11. And this is part of the good news, part of the Christmas story. The angel comes to the shepherds and the angel says, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good tidings of great joy for all people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Messiah, the Christ." Good tidings of the angel came for all people, for every man, woman, and child on the face of the planet, not just for some, not for others, but for you and for me and for everyone here. This is where I feel like I'm just on the cusp. I've got the Bible. I'm going to start preaching because I'm so excited. This is our opportunity to be regenerated. This is our opportunity to remember that the Christ, the Messiah, is in us, born in the city of David. That's being born in our heart. Metaphysically, David represents love. So in our love, even if it's just a little teeny tiny bit, but in that love, we can remember, we can regenerate, we can be saved. This is our salvation that we're looking for, and it's good news for everyone. Everyone. When we recognize people, when we recognize that everybody's nice, our personal nice lists actually have an infinite capacity for expansion. In the fundamental Christian tradition, it would be say there's room for everyone in the book of life. And in the movie, it was said that if you tune into your heart and you change your thinking, if you change your actions after tuning into your heart, you can move from being on the naughty list to the nice list. This is true in Unity too. We call it transformation. We call it transformation because we wake up wherever we are in our degeneration, and we have the opportunity to regenerate, to remember our divinity. We have that opportunity for salvation. Now, without even thinking very hard, I'm sure that you can come up with at least 5 people who are nice. Who are nice. Who are nuts. Although that might not be hard either. Nice. N-I-C-E. Nice. 5 people. So 1, and then think of another one. 2, 3, 4, 5. It's easy to think of these people because it's easy for us to see the best in them. It's easy for us to see how much they love life. It's easy for us to see what kind of sense of humor they have. It's easy for us to see them overcome obstacles with grace that they never knew they had. It's easy for us to see them as nice. And then there are people who are hard to see as nice. It is, those other people. It's harder for us to see them as nice. But should we choose to look at them with spiritual eyes, With spiritual eyes, we can shift our focus from the untruth to the truth. We can shift our focus away from anything that is an appearance of a separation from God to a remembrance that they too are one with God, that they too are a blessing in our lives. When we assume, when we choose to think that people are kind and generous, we see kind and generous people. When we deepen our hearts to be more loving, we find more loving people in our lives. When we remember that each one of us is created with sacred worth, then we more easily recognize the sacred worth in other people. Again, our nice list has an infinite capacity for expansion. And that's one way to look at the code of the elves from a theological perspective. Another way is this, and I'm going to tell you a story from Matthew 16. And it's about the practice of spiritual mastery and how that is required so that we can recognize that everyone is meant to be on the nice list. Now, Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, or Elijah, or Jeremiah, or other prophets." And then he looked at one in particular and he said, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." I love how Jesus uses this story as a teaching moment. He starts from the outside. Who do they say I am? He reaches as far as he possibly can and says, who do those people way out there say that I am? And then he brings it closer to home. And he says to someone he trusts, he says, who do you say I am? And he wouldn't know whether they were accurate or not unless Jesus himself had spent time in prayer and meditation and recognizing through his good works what he actually was. There has to be that spark of recognition from within. But he started first with way out there. And I think as humans, that's what we're trained to do. Let's use an assessment way out there to tell me about myself. Let me use an assessment of some average statistic or national standard or somebody else's opinion to tell me whether or not I'm good, whether or not I'm smart, whether or not I'm beautiful. We start out there and we learn how to do it from birth. When we're born, like when my kids were born, my boys, they were both in the 50th percentile for weight. See, they're already being measured. They were in the 90th percentile for height. And we carry this on throughout life. In school, we're given a grade as a C because we compare as average to other people. Or maybe we're given a B because we tried a little bit harder, more than the average person. Or maybe we get an A because we were exceptional in our performance compared to the average person. Who do they say I am? Mr. Fillmore interpreted the responses from the disciples metaphysically. He said the disciples did guesswork. They did guesswork because they weren't sure what they thought. They said, I don't know, John the Baptist? Was it Elijah? Was it Jeremiah? Metaphysically, John the Baptist is that high intellectual perception of the truth. Metaphysically, Elijah is the spiritual consciousness in the I am of man. Jeremiah represents spiritual faith in the observation of divine law. Now, if somebody came to me and said, wow, you have a high intellectual perception of truth, I would say, thank you very much. But they were guessing. So Jesus turned to Peter. He asked somebody he knew. Because isn't that what we do as human beings? We turn to other people to validate our opinions about ourselves. And I do this all the time. I ask people for feedback because I want to make sure that my highest and best is seen as highest and best from other people. I don't ask any Joe or Jane off the street, do you think I'm smart? Do you think I'm beautiful? That would be narcissistic. Just saying. Just saying. But I do ask people I live with. I ask people I work with. I ask people I admire. I ask the people I serve. I ask Nikki. I ask Lainey Mauger, who's the president of our board. And I ask you because I want you to have value for our time together. So who do you think I am? Who do you think I am? To be in the consciousness of the nice list all the time takes spiritual mastery. It takes an application and an understanding and a recognition of the truth of our spiritual identity. And we find that through faith. Jesus asked Peter. Peter metaphysically represents faith. So when we stand firm in faith, then we begin to remember and recognize our own spiritual identity. That is regeneration. That regeneration is our salvation. And that's what the Christmas message is all about. So I'm going to ask you to remember who was on your... Well, before I ask you to do that, I'm going to ask you to recognize right now that that spark of divinity is in you. And we have a spiritual practice called affirmations and denials. Those are the keys to the kingdom. And the more we use the keys to the kingdom, the greater experience right here and now that we have of the kingdom of heaven. So affirmation and denial. We affirm the truth of us, and we deny any appearance to the contrary. We affirm our spiritual identity, and we deny any distraction that comes up that gets in the way, that serves as an obstacle to us living out our spiritual identity all the time. The affirmation is easy. You know it. I am a beloved expression of God. Say that with me, please. I am a beloved expression of God. And the denial is, I deny any distraction to that great truth. I deny any distraction to that great truth. You've said it for yourself. Now I'm going to ask you to remember somebody who's on your nice list. You have 5 people to choose from, at least. And I want you to bring them to mind. And I want you to bring them to mind as easily as you would the easiest task you can think of, like taking a sip of hot tea on a cold day, or a nice drink of coffee in front of the fire. Bring that person to mind. And I want you to say this. I'm going to put it, oh, you're already up. Okay, good. So we're going to tell them they are a beloved expression of God. And then we're going to deny, because it's our spiritual eyes that we are mastering. I deny any distraction from this great truth. So with that person in mind, say to them out loud, we're going to do it all together, you are a beloved expression of God. Together? You are a beloved expression of God. And together, I deny any distraction from this great truth. And now we're going to kick it up a notch, spiritually speaking, in our spiritual mastery, because we're going to think of one of those other people. that we've been having a difficulty with. It may be somebody we don't even know personally. It may be somebody who's removed from us. It may be somebody who we've given a fleeting thought to being closer with. Or it may be somebody who we used to be closer with and we want to be close again. We want them back on our nice list. And so, yes, our spiritual mastery has been kicked up a notch. So with that person in mind, say, you are a beloved expression of God. I deny any distraction to this great truth. It's a good start. And it's a good thing that we treat every day like Christmas, so that we can every day shift, transform more and more people to our nice list, because we have an infinite capacity for people on our nice lists. One of the beautiful things about the Hindu tradition is they have a word called namaste, and it's that moment when our spark of divinity recognizes someone else's spark of divinity. When we say, yes, you and I are in oneness together. You and I are created in sacred worth. You and I can be kind and generous to people and treat them with respect. You and I have that in us. So we're going to sing our way into meditation with a Namaste song.